Hi, everybody. Welcome to Horsepower Heritage. I'm Maurice Merrick, and greetings to all of you wherever you might be, listening from all points of the compass. Thanks for coming in for another episode. And today, my guest is a third-generation car guy. Phillip Griot is the proprietor of Griot's Motors in Tacoma, Washington. It's a full-service restoration shop, but they also have other services like pre-purchase inspections, consulting on classic cars, as well as general care and maintenance and storage. So lots of services under one roof, but Phillip is a passionate car guy, and if you recognize the name Griot, it's because Phillip's father is the founder of Griot's Garage, the car care products company. I always love getting their catalogs in the mail, and they're not just about polishes and detail sprays. They also carry all sorts of clever garage tools for the detailer, things like specialized buckets and brushes. So as you can imagine, Phillip was a car guy from the cradle, and there was a whole lot to talk about on this one. Time just flew by, and we probably could have done a couple more hours. We were ready to, at least. So I think you're going to enjoy it, and I want to ask you to become a patron of the show. Go to buymeacoffee.com/HP Heritage. You can do a one-time contribution as little as $2, or you can make it a regular contribution and you can put in any amount you like. But that helps me to keep bringing you this podcast. And don't forget, tell your friends about Horsepower Heritage and leave me 5 stars and a quick review on Apple Podcasts. And Spotify also has that feature now too, by the way. It's not quite the same, but every little bit helps me reach more gearheads like you. All right, that's enough for the intro. Stay right there because in a few moments, I've got Phillip Griot of Griot's Motors. And that's coming up right after this. This episode of Horsepower Heritage is sponsored by Model Citizen Diecast. No matter what's in your garage, you can fit all your automotive heroes on a shelf. And they've got you covered, whether it's 1/43rd scale, 1/18th scale, or even the ginormous 1/8 scale masterpieces from the Amalgam Collection. Go to ModelCitizenDiecast.com and get 10% off when you use the promo code HERITAGE at checkout. Limitations apply. From race cars to street cars and everything in between, it's Model Citizen Diecast, because your inner child still wants to play with cars. Phillip, I'm curious, how old are you?
I'm 34, and I'll be 35 on April 25th if you want to come to my birthday party. But,
I would love that.
Yeah, yeah. No, I'm young. I'm young for the industry. I feel old because the last 4 years have turned most of my hair gray, or it's going gray. I think that's just running a business. But I'm 35 years old, so we're young fledglings in the restoration world and in the sales world, and we're aware of that, and that's part of our strategy too. But yeah, that was a long answer to how old are you? But there you go.
That's why I asked, because for you to start a restoration business, and then it's not just automotive restoration, right? You're doing consulting, you're doing support functions like care and maintenance and storage and all of that, right?
Yeah, we're doing a lot, and I think we just use restoration as the way to convey, I think, the ultimate drive and purpose of the restoration side. But where we really had our foundations, starting out on that side, was really bringing back restorations that might have been at 90% or not fully completed in regards to, hey, does this run? Is it still leaking? Is it it looks restored, but it doesn't operate well. And then the detailing side of it. So we do a lot of restoration, full resto builds. We do a ton of modification, resto mods for people that have an old car, that want it to operate at modern speeds and safety. And then we have a lot of people who bring in, an F40 or a Concours car, and they say, "Hey, it's just sat for a while. Can you do an inspection on it and tell me what may be incorrect over the, it might have changed ownership 5 times, and they want to make sure that some of those tweaks or modifications, or even in some cases, services through the years where they used maybe unoriginal parts or what they had on hand, we went back and made sure it was as original as possible. And we send a lot of people to the concours lawn, and our goal is to make sure that they have fun, but that also that their car represents well and can score in the high points. So that's like where we initiated.
And of course, with every car, there's sort of a punch list of known problems,
Right.
So whether you're talking about a Porsche or a Ferrari or a VW Golf, they all have their eccentricities, and that's the stuff you're looking for primarily, right?
Right. And it's funny because people always ask, what do you specialize in? And you just listed through really what's sitting in our shop right now. We have, a Ferrari, 2 Volkswagen Rabbits. We finished a Mark II Golf late last year. But we try and look at everything as a standard process in the way that we treat each car and inspect each car. And that really helps us make sure that we're nailing the big problems that come in. And then for specific cars, there's always something that is, in some cases, regarded as, a quirk that people enjoy about them that goes wrong all the time. Like if you like to drive Land Rovers, and like I do, they tend to be a little unreliable, but they're beautiful. But so, there's a list, and in some cases it's an experience thing. And we have a Rolodex of people that know when you don't have a specialty, you can't have a depth of knowledge on one specific car. We have a breadth of knowledge on a lot of different cars. We've seen a ton of different problems, and that gives us a lot of experience for a lot of different problems. But when we have a problem with a very specific car and a very specific problem, we bring in an expert, and we like to sit down with them, go through the car, take notes, record, and kind of reflect on that. And that's, again, that's just experience, and we pay for that out of our pocket sometimes to go out and say, hey, we don't know this. We don't know how to execute this specific paint technique. And that's generally how we also find people and hire them. So they come in as specialists, and we ask if they want a job. So
I think that's so smart, Phillip, because most successful business people realize their own limitations, and they don't know everything. So you seek out the subject matter experts. You find the right team,
right?
And you're saving money in the long run, and you're
right.
You're also building your in-house knowledge. Bringing those people in, and years from now, you're probably going to have an amazing database of details on a wide variety of cars.
Right. And I'm building a library for resources. My fear is that I don't know where this information is going to go, and we talk to as many industry experts as we can. We bring them through the doors. We beg them to work for us, and I think the reality is understanding what we don't know, and that's critically important when you're taking on the responsibility of restoring someone's car, or even selling a car to someone. It's just, we don't know this answer, and it doesn't happen often. But when we do, like you said, it's, we get that money back by investing in acquiring the right knowledge. And we go to the top people that know the most. I spend a lot of my time when I'm at a car show or an auction, going down my Rolodex of people and seeing if they meet me for a drink or a meal, and just talk about, hey, what's going on with these cars in the market, or we have this car in the shop, we have these specific problems, and most of these people have 30, 40 years of dealing with that specific problem, and it's a quick fix.
Yeah, tracking the market is a full-time career in and of itself if you want it to be. I'll tell you, that's one of my weak spots in my automotive knowledge. I know a little about a lot, but one of the things that I don't pay too much attention to is market trends.
Right.
I should really know better. And there's like 2 or 3 sources you can go to and get a fairly good idea of what the market is doing at any time. But I think that's so smart of you.
Yeah. I get hundreds of emails. I feel like daily. I can't keep up with them either. And it's tough. There's so many specialists in Porsche and Ferrari, and even within Porsche and Ferrari, you get into the microcosms of I specialize in the 83 to 89 Carreras. And I know the market better than anyone. And even that takes an incredible amount of time. And so for the sales side, we hone down to what we are absolute experts on, what we know the best. And that's for the cars that we buy ourselves, that we can understand the risks. We control what we can control. In regards to experience, we have a ton of experience in-house, but that doesn't, in some cases, matter. And you can get, anyone can get burned buying a car when you look generally at things that may be problematic without understanding specifically for the model or both in restoration and sales, what could potentially be an issue that you don't understand, either from not working on them through a 30-year long career, or not getting burned. And unfortunately, you have to sometimes get torched a little bit to learn that lesson. And
there's also that time pressure too, isn't there? I mean, when a car is on the market, it's a desirable model. There's multiple suitors going for that car.
Right.
I mean, there are limitations to the pre-purchase inspection. And a lot of that is a function of that time limitation. Does that make sense?
It's a tool. Yeah. No, I think that's the big problem with Bring a Trailer. And we sell on Bring a Trailer a lot, but when you put a timer on anything, it's generally good for the seller and not really that great for the buyer. Because there's a bunch of psychological reasons where you feel like, hey, this car is going away in 7 days, or if you get to it like my dad does a lot with 1 day left, he's like, I gotta have it. And so you might have a checklist that you would generally go through in person on a car. You might forego some of them to make it make sense. And in some cases, those people aren't happy with their purchase. And I think going back to your initial question too, or a statement you made about not really being able to keep up with the market, it's really hard to do that. And I've struggled the most over the last 2 years because prices have been in some cases, they've rapidly climbed. And I know in 2022, we were selling cars that I was saying, why are people buying these from me at these prices? I couldn't accurately quote the market value of a car because people were paying, in some cases, double what I thought it was worth for anything, not even a great car. But going back, I think there's two sides of that. There's the business side, which we tend to turn cars into a commodity, which is unfortunate and passionless in some senses, where you have to look at it as like, hey, that's, the higher it goes, the riskier it gets for me to, bring that on in inventory. And then there's the other side as an investor and passionate collector of cars myself. The thing I've always done is relative value. And it's, hey, like a Boss 429 hasn't moved for 4 years, but a 70 911S has doubled. Maybe not doubled, but they've gone insane. I think General Muscle cars haven't moved at all since 2015. But I always look at, okay, it's dollar per smile. What am I getting out of this car? And when I buy a personal car, and I tend to look in other directions, and I think that is the product of being able to like more than one type of car, not be stuck into, hey, I'm a Porsche fanatic, or I'm Ferrari for life, and I can look at, I can't afford a Ferrari today. I'll go buy a Fiat, and I'll enjoy it.
Right now, it should be the easiest time in history to track values, right? Because it's all digital now. So there's so many sources that you can pull your data from. Whereas, in 1980, there was no way to track how cars were selling out of Hemmings or Road and Track or what have you. But I think the difference now is the digital era has injected a lot more volatility in the market. And this goes to what you were saying with regard to how prices are like, you'll see spikes, and you'll see certain cars make a really good run and then flatten out. And the muscle car thing, if I'm recalling correctly, 2005 maybe was like peak muscle.
Right.
And that's when those guys who couldn't afford those cars when they were in high school really had the cash. And you had the emergence of the Mecum auctions. Television got involved, so that hyped everything up. We had all these auctions on TV. It's so funny. There's so many forces working on values, and oftentimes condition is that, like, the best cars are always going to sell well. But then all of those mid-range cars, that's where it gets tricky, right?
Right. And that's the problem we most often have when selling a car for someone. The amount of information out there is a great thing. It's forced a level of transparency that I don't think existed in let's say the used car or the collector car market for a very long time. You can't get away with as much if you're selling it. You can try, but it might begin to catch up with you if you're attempting to conceal facts or not include relevant information about the sale of your car. But I think you're right. I talked to my dad a lot because in the early 2000s, some of these cars were worth absolutely nothing. I mean, they weren't worth restoring. We're talking about a Miura he bought for $25,000 in 2002. And
wow.
It's, and he thought he rang the bell when someone offered him $50,000 for it. And he was like, wow, I'm the smartest guy alive. And now you look at the prices, and I think there's just been more financialization of it, more tracking of it. And some people look at them now more as investments rather than just a car to hop into and enjoy and or look at and kind of celebrate. And it's both good and bad. But I don't mean to say that it's bad, but it's getting outrageous. The amount of information you can get I think we're probably due for a little bit of a break. And I think we're seeing some softness in areas for sure. Like you said, a strong car is always going to carry a great price. But there's so much information. Everyone has an auction house now and online auction platform and online classifieds, and everywhere you turn, there's sellers everywhere. And, that's fine. It just means, you have to work harder to stand out amongst those. And I think we're more well informed. So that therefore the people with the experience to stand out among the well informed really tend to do well. On the other side of that, and we talk about flagship cars a lot, the bell ringers, and those are the cars that essentially establish a new market. Bring a Trailer does a great job of representing sales prices graphically, and so you can see where those prices are. The good thing about that is you can really easily evaluate where you sit in the range of value. The difficult thing is when people look at, wow, top dollar car. That's my car too. And, we experience this often. And the best example for me is, and it's not a celebrated example. It's an unfortunate example, but I sold a 240D for, I think, the top price, at least in 2021. It was immaculate, 38,000 mile example. I dry ice blasted it, took, I think, over 300 photos of it. It was a 1983 manual, AC, bunt wheels, like everything, every option you wanted in perfect condition. Door had been repainted, but we worked to represent it well. And I had a individual call me and said, "Hey, I have a 25,000 mile 240D it's a 1981. It's a manual, but came from Yugoslavia with her dad, who bought it originally there, and but it sat for 25 years. Do you want to buy it for me?" And I said, "Well, what do you want?" She said, "Well, you sold one for $41,000, so around there." So I put over $10,000 into that car, and I worked hard to get it there, and we ultimately, I gave her what I thought was a fair price. And I think I offered $17,500, which for 240Ds it was really good price. It still is a really good price,
particularly for a car that's been sitting, because anybody who knows Mercedes-Benz, when they sit, that's when your problems really begin.
Oh yeah.
I mean, that's true for most cars, but yeah, you don't want one. There's nothing so expensive as a cheap Mercedes-Benz.
No, they're getting more expensive. I mean, I think they're due for in some cases they've appreciated at least the 300 TDs very well. But you look at a junker and it's like $5,000 for a pile and then 15 for a 150,000 mile car. And but I offered her that and she turned it down and listed it on Bring a Trailer with I think like 25 photos of it, and it was a no sale at 12.5. And she called me back, and at that point it's just how it works. I mean, we didn't buy the car, and she ended up I think ultimately selling it to the second buyer. But it's really tough. I think it's tough for people to distinguish between price and the actual value and where their car sits on that spectrum.
Totally agree.
Yeah, and that's the issue today with talking to people and being as gentle as you can about, hey, like let me show you why you might be more towards the middle, and let me show you how we can probably present the car a little bit better than that. We want people to leave, whether they consign with us or restore with us, with more information on their car than they had before. And so we always try and provide some kind of value, whether the relationship works out or not.
Well, and you do have to manage expectations, especially when maybe someone paid X dollars for the car when they purchased it and they come to find out they're maybe a little bit underwater, or it didn't appreciate like they thought it would. They need to get out of that deal, at least for even money.
Right.
And that can be tough.
It can. And in some cases, it's not possible.
Right.
I think that comes to, in some cases, again, the price and information, where you might have a private buyer and a private seller who are negotiating based on a price online, who might not be aware of maybe some of the things that may be incorrect about their car. And so they do a private transaction and then they try and take it public. And the public market, which is very well informed, is looking at it and saying, it's not what it's worth.
Yeah.
In fact, it's worth a little bit less than that. And you've put more money into it. And we get that on both people who do passionate restorations or maybe hot rodded restorations, where they really love the car. They have a lot of fond memories in it. And, but you have to find in a room full of potential 10 buyers, you eliminate 7 of them I say eliminate one person for every modification you do to a car is what I usually tell people who come in.
It's a good rule of thumb. I wanted to say something about Bring a Trailer. So you mentioned the great data that they produce as a result of their sales. And, you can pick any car and you can go to that plot of all of their sales, right? Mm-hmm. Every car that's been on the site. And I'll just go in there and click on the lowest number, the highest number, based on sale price.
Right.
It's very interesting to just kind of poke around on a given make and model and see what they've done over the years. Yeah.
And in a lot of cases that you have to be careful for the outlier at the top, because could be a complete custom. I like the high, I call it the shoulder, where you get like the high average and then the low average. And, the top tier ones are rare. These are in some cases one-off color combinations or a custom build or something like that. But yeah, I love looking at that. We have a lot of cars that we've sold that are in the high. It makes us feel proud going back through there, because we've been pretty successful selling on Bring a Trailer. And I think Bring a Trailer is a great one, and it had been around for a very long time. And I think COVID really just kicked the door in on it being probably one of the better ways to sell a car on the line, at least. And it doesn't come, it's not, there are issues with it. And I think it comes from agency in regards to them being really just a middleman who connects a buyer and a seller, and, and the potential for having maybe a buyer who doesn't follow through with a sale, or a seller who may not actually disclose what may be wrong about an auction. So there's issues of that, and that's my only problem with it is there's no real way to publicly tar and feather someone who might be like a dishonest seller or a repeat dishonest seller, or they'll ban a buyer who doesn't follow through with a sale, which it happens all the time. But that doesn't really do much to deter them from that. But other than that, it's a community. It's great.
Yeah, and there's also no perfect platform.
No.
Again, buyer beware no matter where you're at, right?
Right.
Hi guys, Maurice Merrick here. April is Parkinson's Awareness Month, and my friends at Drive Toward a Cure have planned a very special event to support Parkinson's research and patient care. An evening of music and motion will be held at the National Automobile Museum in Reno, Nevada on Thursday, April 18th. The event will feature prominent cars owned by performing artists, as well as cars driven by legendary racers who were challenged by Parkinson's disease. Legends like Phil Hill and his C-Type Jaguar. Special guests at an evening of music and motion include singer, actress, and producer Vanessa Williams, Rashida Ali, daughter of heavyweight boxing champion Muhammad Ali, and Shelby Hall, granddaughter of the legendary Baja racer Rod Hall. It promises to be an evening to remember, with cars, music, and more. The event is just around the corner, April 18th, so get your tickets or make a contribution at drivetowardacure.org. Just click the link in the show notes. That's drivetowardacure.org, supporting Parkinson's research and patient care. Hey, Phillip, can we backtrack a little bit? Because I'm really curious about growing up in the Griot household.
Oh, yeah.
So your dad founded this amazing car care products company called Griot's Garage, and the marketing behind it with the catalog, right, I think was always genius. And it made car care a pastime.
Right.
And I think that was very smart.
I'm so happy that you asked this question. It's been it's incredibly important to me growing up. Growing up in and around Griot's Garage, but also around my dad. And I think a lot of people who may not have met him may look at it as, he puts on a mask or a persona when he goes out and acts like a car crazy nut job. But the reality is I've never met anyone that is more insane about cars. I get texts from him at 3:30, like, whoopsie, I bought a car in Idaho. I need you to go pick it up for me. And just how that is. So, I would love to talk to you about him specifically and how he kind of influenced me, because I think that's critical to understanding how Griot's Motors even comes to be, but also Griot's Garage and his passion and how that, through just sheer determination to do something related to cars, how that came to be and the ups and downs of that, and how he always just kept it fun too, though. But if you want to talk about Richard Griot, I think the coolest thing about him is that it just, his love of cars just came out of nowhere. He'll tell you when the needle, entered his arm was in 1971. His dad was in between jobs and I think wanted to do just a walkabout with his family and ended up ordering a Volkswagen bus. They took Euro delivery in Copenhagen. They outfitted it. My dad was 10 years old at this time, and they outfitted it with a refrigerator and everything they'd need to live in the bus with, family of four, his 13-year-old sister and his mom. And they outfitted it in Copenhagen, drove through Finland, Denmark, through Germany, Austria, and then down to Rome, where my grandfather ran into one of his friends who just came back from a safari across Africa. And they decided that they were going to do a safari across Africa. And his friend helped them modify this 1971 Volkswagen bus to cross Africa. And they finished a European tour as it was getting colder, ended up in France. That boat took them from France over to Tunisia. They met up with a group of 3 or 4, I think Series 2 or 3 Land Rover, like a tour group that were going to drive through the Sahara Desert. And they just tagged along and they crossed the Sahara Desert in a Volkswagen bus with some of the, some sand tires on the rear. Went through the Congo, went down through Zimbabwe, which was Rhodesia at the time, and then ended in Cape Town. And the amazing thing is watching them as a family unit and all the photos they have and everything they brought back from that trip in terms of souvenirs and artifacts of the trip. And just listen to them just rattle off story after story after story. And hearing my dad talk about, these Land Rovers that would blow a head gasket and just spray oil everywhere. And everyone in the car would be covered in oil. And they had no option to clean it off for a day or two. And it was just amazing. And the thing my dad pulls from that story multiple times is his observation of how happy people were without money in the middle of nowhere. And he said he revisited that trip often when he was struggling at Griot's Garage or when he was in a bad time, to remind himself that even if everything went to zero and it didn't work out, I could still be happy. I could go out and have a great time. And so he never had that fear of really taking a big swing and doing something that he really was passionate about. And that trip is something that he wanted to, I call it the Griswold-esque, tenacity to force us into whatever jalopy he could get his hands on and drive us cross country. And so that need for his dad to go out and adventure was born in him. And, he took, a lot of people ask me what my favorite car is. And of all the cars I've, driven and worked on and been around, it's our 1972 Chevy Suburban that we shop down here, J&L Fabrication, restored over 20 years ago. And we drove up through Glacier National Park, down into Glacier National Park in Montana, through Yellowstone, through the Tetons, and came back. And that car has, I think, over 20,000 miles on it now. And our family abuses it. And now my kids, they call it the Bourbon. It's the car that will never leave our hands ever. I've run it into a wall. We've repaired it multiple times, and it's our favorite kind of child hauler and adventure cruiser. And I mean, it's Spartan. It's not the most comfortable vehicle, but it has soul. And that was something that he really instilled in us by putting us into these cars. I think if I didn't do that, I don't know if I would be in this business. It just made me so happy to be in and around cars. And I'm going to say it again, but he's an absolute nut job. I mean, I grew up, anything he couldn't sell in the Griot's Garage catalog was given to us as a gift. You'll see my quotation marks, as a gift. So I think
air quotes.
Yeah, I think we had 300 spare pairs of these hot rod flame slippers that I wore from my 8th birthday until I was 16, and my feet couldn't cram into them anymore. So I think I gave away a lot of them to my friends and everything. But we had, carburetor, salt and pepper shakers, a motorcycle in our living room. Oftentimes we had a weekend project where we were, Brillo padding rust or paint off of something quickly for him to, it was just absolutely insane. And I appreciate that he was that passionate, because a lot of it has rubbed off. And I hope to, in some capacity, make people as happy as he's been able to do with Griot's Garage.
Well, it sounds like your dad is a really fun guy to be around, and that enthusiasm rubs off on the people around him.
Absolutely. I think he can walk into any group and have things to talk to them about, because he's just been in every car, and he finds something endearing about all types of cars. And he's had so many different cycles in regards to what he finds important about cars. And right now he's retired. So what he likes to do is he likes to buy a car sight unseen on eBay or bring a trailer and see if he can get it home. And so it's kind of like the coin toss car. And sometimes he doesn't.
And when you say he wants to see if he can get it home, he's going to drive it home from wherever he purchased it.
Oh yeah. He flies in and drives it home, sometimes with his wife. And I think she stopped going with him because there's been a couple times where the car did not make it home. but that's what he finds fun. And right now he and I are trying to plan. He bought a 110 and a 130, a Defender, and now we're talking about how to outfit them and go down to Patagonia and drive up through Latin America with our kids. Well, my kids and my brother's kids as well.
That's fantastic.
And so he just won't ever stop. I mean, he tells me to bury him in one of his cars or fire him out of an exhaust pipe, and he's dead serious. So,
by the way, can I just suggest, if you're going to go custom on those Defenders, 2.8 Cummins diesel and a Tremec 5-speed.
That's what I'm leaning into. One of them has a 200 TDI, and he wants to just go with a 300 TDI because of the ease of work on it. But the Cummins won't fail. Is the whole thing. So I think that's the best motor that you can swap in.
Exactly.
Yeah.
They sold a lot of those, I think, in South America, so parts should be readily available if you do have a problem.
Well, we've looked into it, and we looked at the prices for the R2.8, and they weren't selling them for a year and a half because I think they just couldn't keep up with the demand of it. But I know they're back on the market, and so he's got a lot of car problems. He can't keep up with the amount of projects and things he wants to do, but that's just how he's been. And I think specifically to your question about Griot's Garage, he started in Riverside, as a mechanic for, a racing school. I'm now blanking on the name of it, but he started as a mechanic, worked in a restoration shop when he lived in Colorado as well. And was just trying to figure out how to keep doing what he loved with cars, but turn it into his own business. And he started the catalog with, I think, one product, and it was a padded creeper. And he put cards in people's windshields down at Laguna Seca, buy my padded creeper. And the first call he got, he had some guy call him, and he was essentially accusing my dad of being a sissy for using a padded creeper. Because the ones that were around were bare wood and had metal wheels, and so he said, "Hey, well, why don't I send you one?" And that guy, I think, was his second client, and he's still a client, and they're great friends now. And he loved the padded creeper, so it went from padded creeper to garage accessories. He had his mom in the warehouse down there taking calls. From there, it just grew, and then he started producing his own detail products. And that's the most fitting line for him because he's the most meticulous person ever when it comes to cars. And growing up with him over your shoulder, showing you how to detail a car and how a car should look and display, and not really settling for anything but perfect.
Everything you said is so interesting because I'll just tell you my experience with Griot's Garage products and the catalog. First of all, the catalog is just really fun to look through. It's great to have on your coffee table. It's enjoyable to page through. And then the whole ethos of it is to get excited about detailing your car. This is actually fun.
Right.
I'll tell you, I've got the Griot's random orbital buffer in my garage, and I love that thing, and it's rock solid. I've never had a problem with it.
Yeah. The lifetime warranty on that too is pretty. I mean, if you do break it, you get to send it in and they'll replace it. And that's a,
I know exactly who to call.
Yeah, you do. And if we should send you a couple new ones anyways. I don't know what model you have, but the vibrations in them have been virtually eliminated, which makes it more fun for me when you start talking about detailing a car for, in some cases, 46 hours. You want to be able to feel your arms at the end of it.
Yes.
Yeah.
That is so true. Well, I'm glad you kind of gave us a little bit of insight into how your dad started the company. And as I said at the outset, you're taking the Griot's name in different directions now. And I'm really interested in talking about the restoration side of your business. Was there a decision point for you whether to go kind of very specialized or generalized in terms of auto restoration?
There wasn't, my 20s were about trying to avoid working for my dad again. It was trying to go out on my own and find my own way in the world. And I lived in New Zealand for a while, came home when my now wife wouldn't move down to New Zealand to live with me. So came back home, started in real estate. And I really didn't like that I wasn't making people happy. It didn't seem like I was making people happy, at least. And so my dad has a collection in the back of GRIOT'S garage, and his position for the manager of the collection opened up, and I stepped in just to help him out. And in my mind, it was a temporary thing while I was considering what direction I was going to go in my life, and ended up just taking to what was natural to me when I was young, which was just studying these cars, writing out their history, and identifying cars that I thought Richard should have in his collection. And then on the other side is he moved to where their headquarters is now in 2009, and he built his little, he calls it the garage mahal in the back there, and it had a little shop in the back at the time was just to service and maintain them. It started with a bunch of different cars, but the first car that was really restored in-house was the 1975 312T, Niki Lauda's championship winning car. And that car was what really started the domino effect of, hey, well, we can do this. We just don't have the space because we're in a tiny little work area back here. We don't have a paint booth. And it kind of slowly progressed from, hey, we can do this, to, hey, you guys are making too much noise in the back now that you're doing full restorations. You need to, you're using a planishing hammer now back there. And every time we would paint something, the overspray would go everywhere. So, and we wouldn't paint a car, but, priming suspension and whatnot, and small bits. And so what we did really well was identify things that were wrong with cars, or that might have, suppressed the value of it. And we fixed them and turned them around. And then we did that and restore cars. And then we were detailing cars all the time for Pebble Beach, Amelia Island, all these shows. And so what really came from that is that we were really good. We got really good at taking any car and studying it, both historically, but also cosmetically and mechanically, and saying, all right, here's everything that's wrong with it. And here's how we're going to bring it back. And so I put together a business plan. I thought, I think we could do this, and invite, outside clients to come in and let us service their cars or restore their cars in the same way that we take care of Richard's stuff. And started the search for a building, and we found a storage shed. It was an ugly building, and built out what we thought was a facility we'd never fill because it was just too big. And now we're looking at more space. But when we left, there was never a strategy of, hey, we're Porsche specialists, we're going to market to Porsche. And that's a difficult thing for us sometimes, because who do you advertise to and how do you advertise? And it really came down to focusing on the process of restoration and being very good at that. That came from me, I think, it's a Charlie Munger quote, but inverting the problem, and how can we do this really poorly? How would we make people unhappy in restoration? And it was like, okay, well, we can be completely foggy on the true cost of restoration and what it might cost, and our actual qualifications. We can be non-communicative and not transparent in what we're doing.
You can overpromise and underdeliver.
Exactly. So we just went through all the ways that we could really be a bad restoration shop. And then we flipped and did the opposite of that. And we made processes for all of that. And we opened our doors February 2020, right before COVID happened. And we went from, this is what we're going to do, to an immediate pivot to, how do we do this differently again? We didn't have any clients. We had, I think Richard sent us like a car or two. He was my first client, obviously. And then we got a slow trickle in, but none of these people were coming in to see the facility. We had only met them over the phone. So we really were trying to figure out, how do we do this well? And how do we take care of the two things that I was discussing, is transparency and really good communication. So we built out, our billing system where every hour was accounted for, and with written notes in an Excel document. But the other side of that was photographing and updating essentially a live folder that our clients have, where they can see our weekly progress. And when they get their bill, they can line up the progress photos with all of our notes from what we've done. And we wanted people to know exactly what we were doing. And that to us is being good at restoration. And we don't want to specialize in anything because I'm a lot like my dad. I'm kind of squirrel brained. Last year I liked Porsches. This year I like Land Rovers because I have 2 kids and I can't fit them in a Porsche, and I could, but I don't think my wife would appreciate me stuffing the kids in the back of one. But
well, it also allows you to be flexible in the marketplace, because right now it might be Land Rovers that are hot, but then, in 2 years it could be 80s pickups coming in for restoration work. So it keeps you limber.
And you're right. And sometimes it takes one car to start even a small trend. And we did that Mark II GTi, and then had 2 Volkswagens enter our shop immediately afterwards that we weren't intending to do. But we were happy to, because they were fun builds, because one of them is a TDI swap and a 74 Rabbit. And the goal was, I want to get 70 miles to the gallon. So when you start with that problem, you get to go up and down the river for wheels, tires, brakes, weight, and everything that might affect that ability to get there. And you better believe that we're gonna hit that mark. And so it's fun. We like having that challenge. And I think some people are just different, and they love doing that. And we appreciate those people that have that kind of that's the specific knowledge. They're needed. I mean, those people are needed to safeguard the history of a lot of these cars and the right way to do certain things. And we rely on them in some senses. But we're very good at solving problems. And I think the biggest thing for us is how much time we take with our clients up front to really understand what's going to make you happy. Like, what do you see yourself doing in this car? Because we need to make sure that when you get that car, that it is fully capable of executing on that goal. And so every car that we finish, and this is before we call it finished, we put it through a 500-mile, break-in period, where we are not trying to break it, but we are trying to, if it breaks, it's going to break in that period of time. Or if something goes wrong, we've had leaks up here that weren't showing up until we drove it for a while and then parked it. So we're really trying to put it through the gamut before we hand the car over. And that's come through observation of what at times ruined my dad's day when he'd get into one of his classic cars and didn't start, or I had a leaky main seal after a 2-year restoration and all these things. And so it's real, again, it just comes back to, we want clients to stick around for life and tell their friends. And how would we want to be treated, and how would we want to receive that car? Critically important.
Do you have more people coming to you for like a factory correct restoration, or are they more interested in, I love this car and I love the classic looks, but let's update it. Let's make it more drivable and usable for today?
I would say it's a healthy split. I would say right now, we have a lot of modified cars in our shop, but the ones in the wings are all classic cars. And I mean, in the wings that we're completing probably 4 or 5 cars in the next 2 to 3 months. And then the cars that have been waiting to start are all technically going to be original cars. And some of them are full restorations, and some of them are, what we talked about is like the detailing side of taking certain things apart, putting it back original, or rebuilding some aspects of it. But I would say it's a pretty even split usually. And we're seeing a lot of people, a lot more engine swaps and modifications, but it's all tasteful. It all comes down to, hey, I want to conceal that I've done something to this car. I want to make it look factory original. So there's a, and I think that's pushed through, the Rod Emerys and the Singers, and where it's tastefully modified, and it's respected and adored, I think, by spectators and people look at it. And I think that is part of a trend right now where, and I've observed, is there's far less people that want to go stand around and look at a car and judge a car, and more drives. People want to get out and drive their car a little bit more. And I think that comes with being around a 9,000-pound Cybertruck. You want to make sure that you can keep up with traffic and outbrake it maybe. But I guess that flexibility has made us able to just say, hey, yeah, we'll do whatever you want. But we have people that will start with a classic car and then start modifying it. That can be problematic in the middle of a restoration. And those ones we like to have, they're really fun because you're given the opportunity to look at the problems that a car might have and try your best to rectify them while retaining some of the soul of the car, as much of the soul as possible. That's my goal. And I always try and push back when people come in. Some people just want power, and that's fine. But they'll come in and say, hey, I want to put, like a massive turbocharger on this, and I want this thing to have record amounts of horsepower. And it's, well, do you plan on driving it? Yeah. Well, I mean, that might be pretty unenjoyable to drive. And just try and show them more of a motorsport take on power delivery, where maybe we should start talking about removing some weight and making the power more linear, but linear torquey, and that's what I like to have fun with it. I think there's a lot of modern swaps where you drop an LS or something where you have a ton of power in a car, but it really struggles to kind of digest that power through the full chassis of the car with big tires, brakes, and everything like that. So not that we won't do it, but we try and come from it from the standpoint of, well, if we're doing that, know that we have to go up and down river for brakes, tires, wheels, chassis, suspension, and you have to start changing a lot of stuff. And the bigger changes you make, the more stress it puts on the actual, I think, drivability of the car.
It's so true. Some people will buy a particular classic car and they think they want to drive that car as it left the factory, but they haven't really actually spent any time behind the wheel of one. So it's disappointing.
Right.
And suddenly they're like, oh, I spent all this money to restore this car and I don't even like driving it. And what they really want is they want the classic look, but they don't want a, let's say, 3 on the tree shifter,
right,
or they want 5 speeds, not 4, or, they want power steering. It can be dicey. Again, this is all about sort of managing expectations. And you are so right about the knock-on effects of modifying one system. It affects the other systems, particularly adding power where you've got to add brakes.
Right.
They go hand in hand. You can't do one without the other, really.
Yeah.
It's not smart.
No, it is not. That's how you get in trouble.
Immediately. In fact, I recall a certain video that went viral a few years ago. This guy built this 1,100 horsepower muscle car and went out on a test drive with a YouTuber and lost his brakes on that drive and wrecked the car.
Wow.
Basically, he kind of overlooked the brakes and ruined his car.
Yeah. And I think that's a problem. And I think a lot of that comes from having some track time myself and knowing, like, weight is always my primary consideration, then the ability to control. And then I usually end at power, which is, maybe I don't end. Some people build a car around a motor, and that's fine.
Yes. But
I like to build a car around a purpose. And most of the time, if I'm alone in a car, I'm going somewhere where there's no traffic, canyon carving. And I want to have linear power, great brakes, very torquey motor. And I don't want to run out of talent halfway through a corner. So
it sounds like you're describing a Porsche.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of Porsche, for sure.
Yeah.
Gun to my head, if I had to choose, it would be Porsche. I like a balance of power, and so I try and push on full spectrum of performance in a car. And suspension and brakes give me confidence in a car.
Phillip, what's the most difficult project you've had so far?
Most difficult. They all tend to have a degree of complexity that may come out. That's usually when something is unforeseen. When we run into it, a lot of metalwork or a car. I think right now, the one we have in is a 3.0 CSI that was completely rotted out once we stripped the paint. And the difficulty of that is the honeycomb, how all the panels honeycomb together, and any kind of water that was trapped in there just ate it from the inside out. So that's been complex in terms of dealing with, I think, disappointment, having to go back and almost reconstruct parts of that car.
For people who don't know, the BMW E9 coupes, the 3.0 CSI and 2.8, they were built by Karmann, so German coach builder, and they've got all sorts of weird void spaces and unusual construction that trap water, and they rust out, and the car can look immaculate from the outside, but it can be a total rust bucket.
It can, and oftentimes they are, and it's very tough to identify. They rust all around they rust everywhere, but usually on the rockers, usually around the windshield and rear window, trunk area. Tough to identify with paint on, because usually is like it starts internally and then begins to
creep to the surface.
Yeah, come out from in, and can be incredibly expensive. And if they're beautiful cars, I absolutely love them. This one is going to be Taiga green, which is a rare color and very cool car. But you can go on any BMW forum and find multiple nightmare scenarios where you got a good deal and you found out why when you get home and get the paint off. So I think the one car we had that gave us frustrations, I should say, was a Range Rover Classic. They did not want to do an LS3. They wanted to have the original engine in, but they wanted it to have more torque and power. So the motor was modified, so that the front and rear diffs had to be modified. And we tend to be our own worst enemies in terms of what our standards of perfect are. And we had to go through 2 or 3 different front diffs and different ratios. The gear noise at highway speeds was so loud that we just weren't happy with it. And it wasn't from the client that was asking us, hey, this is unacceptable. He never saw it, but we paid for 2 additional axles that we ended up eating out of our pocket because we wanted to get it right. And so we went through and we had to make sure that it was a luxury vehicle, that this guy, that's what he wanted, that didn't have this obtrusive sound at highway speeds when he was driving it around. So,
well, trial and error is going to be inevitable, right? With these projects.
Yeah. And all of them have complexities. They're like puzzles. And, I think the process that I talk about is building our own Lego kit. And if you ever do get up here to visit, I'd be happy to show you our storage and organization system and how we break down a car and store all the nuts and bolts. And we like to build our own Lego kit. And we find that it cuts a lot of time out of the build without rushing the build.
That's smart.
That has come from also trying to chase nuts and bolts around the shop and having parts on the ground that we don't want there. And so I was lucky enough to go over to McLaren with Bruce McLaren's M6A, which Richard owns. We were taking it over for Festival of Speed at Goodwood, and they gave us a tour of their facility, and they have a little restoration program there. And I mean, I felt like I was on the Death Star. Everything was immaculately clean, organized, and not to say that they're evil, but it was like, I felt like I was in a secret lair. I brought a lot of that inspiration back of, hey, like our workspaces, our floors need to be immaculately clean. And that sets the tone for when a client comes in, like everything we do in here is clean and everything we touch is clean and detail oriented. And that's how we want them to feel about the project we're working on. Is they're not going to overlook anything because they can literally eat off their floor.
I would expect nothing less from a guy named Griot, honestly.
Yeah. That's the curse, right? It's not the curse, but you're looking at everything and
got to uphold the family name.
Exactly. I can't shame the family name.
Well, I would love to come up sometime. I don't make it up to the Pacific Northwest very often, but I would love to see your place. That'd be awesome.
Yeah, I don't blame you. I mean, it rains a lot up here. So.
The few times I've visited Seattle and Portland and whatnot, we got lucky. Amazing, beautiful weather, like Southern California weather.
Yeah.
The other thing about the region is it has amazing car culture and so many cool classics and, motorsport. And there's a lot going on with the car community in Seattle, Portland.
Absolutely. There's a ton. There's not a lot of, I think in regards to shops up here, there's not a ton, but there's a lot of car fanatics up here. And I think this is where a lot of large car clubs were founded. And I know that thanks to Microsoft, there's a lot of massive car collections tucked away up here. Some of the greatest cars of all time.
Yeah. Interesting that you mentioned that, because one of the things that's changed the marketplace in the last 15 years are all the tech bros, right? All of this Silicon Valley money, right? Suddenly these guys in their 30s have millions of dollars to spend, and they're not really car guys yet, but they're kind of intrigued. So maybe they want to buy a Lancia Delta Integrale or an E30 M3 or something, but they're like babes in the woods. They're not even quite sure where to start.
Right.
And I've had conversations with these guys where they're ready to throw money at not a very good car.
Yeah.
They're not even sure what they're looking at, but yet they're ready to spend big bucks.
Yeah, we saw a lot of that in 2022, where people were calling themselves investors in these cars, and they were buying cars at prices that I was like, well, that's going to be a tough one to get your money back on, Mr. Investor. But we talked about it earlier, where it has entered the realm of an investment class, similar to art. With that, now you have the K500, which is Simon Kidston's value tracker. You have Hammer Price, which shows you, live auction results, and a bunch of different
Haggerty,
a bunch of tools to value your investment. And people talk about it as an investment, and it's great and it's important. It's good for businesses like mine that do well in showcasing both the dirty underside of the world of cars and how you can get in trouble. And we try and be upfront and honest about like how you can get in trouble buying cars, and because it should be fun. And I think the difficulty of the investor side is really truly understanding cost of being correct in your assessment of value. Of if you're valuing it on it being original, how have you verified that? And in a lot of cases, you can find an expert. We certainly have to go inspect valuable cars, and you eat the cost and you say, wow, I just paid this, for a 911 Carrera 2.7 Carrera RS. I'm speaking out of turn now. Throwing a bunch of casual lingo out. I should be more specific. So a 1973 Carrera RS, one of the most copied cars. It's not uncommon to get a European Carrera RS that was previously a 911T that they welded fenders on and ground down the VIN and frauded their way into a $1 million sale. And yeah,
it's the German version of the Shelby GT350 clone, right?
Exactly. Yeah. And it happens. And so you look at it as like, how much do I have to pay to send this guy over there? Well, it's far less than it's going to cost me to buy a fraudulent car, or buy a car that maybe not be fraudulent, but misrepresented. And the issue with saying, even claiming misrepresentation, is that sometimes a misrepresentation is just people not understanding the difference in someone's definition of perfect. It's your responsibility to go down and inspect it. So,
well, I have kind of an extreme example for you. Not long ago, I had Robert Nagel on the show, and he's the stunt coordinator for Ford v Ferrari and the new Ferrari film. And we talked about the cars that they had to build for Ferrari, and they were Caterham based, but all of the cars were destroyed after the film. Now, there's a few reasons for that, not the least of which is liability after the fact, right? Because they're not production cars. But also, Ferrari wanted them destroyed because it might not seem like it today or next year, but in 15 years, that car could have been purchased by someone unscrupulous who tries to make it into a clone or tries to, make it a fraudulent car. And now it's in the marketplace and they're asking millions of dollars for it. And there are some very, very good copies out there, let's say. Everyone's concerned about protecting the authenticity in the marketplace.
100%. And I think most people are. I know the historic Seinfeld versus, I think, European collectibles with the 356. I think I don't recall all the information of that story. I think it was sold without being able to verify that. It's really difficult to do.
And a guy like Seinfeld, who's got all the resources in the world to verify a car, and it can happen to him.
Yeah, it can happen to anyone. It happens a lot with race cars, a ton, because there's not a lot of verification that happens with those. You've got, and if it's been hit in a race or crashed and rebuilt, it's even sketchier because a lot of the things are gone. But a very valuable race car is one that has A, never been hit, B, has won some races, and then you have the records of here's us tracking this chassis number through all the historic races. There are notes, all verified, letters, everything that came with the car. And if you're lucky, you have some FIA documentation, certification that is the original tub and body of the car. And we've had cars where we had a letter from Enzo Ferrari for one of the cars certifying that it was the car that they raced. And this was a really early car. It stuck with the car. It was Gilles Villeneuve's 312, I think B4.
Well, it's tricky too because race cars, they get modified and changed at the spur of the moment. All throughout a season, the car is getting changed, or historically that was the case. You've made me think of a certain Ferrari. I won't even say the model. There's very few real ones out there.
Right.
And there's an excellent, excellent replica that, supposedly is on a authentic chassis, but maybe not. And it caught fire. And I mean, maybe only some lug nuts at the last remaining original part.
Yeah.
It really comes down to that fine detail. I think the car I'm talking about.
Yeah. My dad and I have talked specifically about that, and I don't know what that car would trade for today, but it wouldn't be. I mean, I have a problem with that in general. I think there's some issues with a bunch of these large manufacturers getting back into restoring their own automobiles. Not the ones that are coming out like Aston Martin and Jaguar, who are remanufacturing a limited amount of 15 cars that are not original cars. But some of the, and I will not name names, but some of the manufacturers that are taking cars into their restoration facilities that are like what you said, they've kind of been almost burnt to a crisp, or there's not much original remaining about the car, and they restore them. And part of the restoration is that because we did it here, we can recertify everything as original because technically it was done here, which is kind of a little bit untrue. And that's the only thing. I don't mind that they do phenomenal work, but remanufacturing parts and calling them original and then saying the car is original from the factory is, I think, a little bit disingenuous. And that's the only problem I have with that. And I think the cars that were originally born in the period should be celebrated. And I think it becomes difficult to bring those cars out without putting an asterisk next to them and saying, technically this is as it should look, but it's not original.
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty sticky, isn't it? One thing that comes to mind is the Aston Martin DB4 GT Zagato, of which I think they built 25 originally. And Aston Martin did a run of them a few years ago, whether you want to call it a continuation car or a rebirth or whatever. But in order to get your hands on one, you had to buy a new Aston Martin. Certain cars like that, there's almost no way to mistake it. They built so few that the odds are that anyone that you see would be a replica, right?
Right.
Less so a Porsche Speedster that could be very convincing. Certain Shelby Cobra replicas are incredibly convincing. So yeah, it's kind of sticky. Now, one case in point I recall was when Jaguar Land Rover was doing the Land Rover Reborn series, and they were taking series Land Rovers, mainly the Series 1 Land Rovers, and they were buying them all over the world. They sent guys out to find original Series 1 Land Rovers. They brought them back to England, and then they were doing a commissioned restoration of these cars. But the program kind of fell on its face. So you were getting a factory restored, meticulous, wonderful car at the end of the day, but the price point was just a little too high. And they canceled the program, and they ended up selling off this inventory that they had gone around the world collecting. I guess my point is that there's been a lot of this kind of speculation with classics among the OEMs. It's a very strange revenue stream if you think about it, because the time and energy they would invest in it, it just doesn't seem to make sense. But I guess it's a loss leader in a sense, because it gives them a whole lot of PR, and it drives people into showrooms. It intrigues people.
Yeah, I think it's trends too. I think it's kind of a sense of a clawback of some of the character that these manufacturers own and developed in their early years. And I think we talked about the almost this overlap in modern design, where a lot of these cars either share the same chassis and look very similar. We're talking about the Lamborghini Urus, the Audi, I think is it the Q5, Q7, Q5?
I can't keep track of it, but yes, to your point, they're the same car under the skin.
Yeah. And so you have this overlap. And so I think it's really difficult to get extremely passionate about modern cars. And so I think they're borrowing some of that. We talked about the $25,000 Mira that was not worth restoring. There was examples of that throughout my life where I was standing in front of, sitting in really great cars that I look back at and think, man, I'm very grateful to have had that opportunity and that experience, but I knew nothing. I just knew it looked good. There's a bunch of funny stories of that. And I think even today, when we walk around, I tell my wife this often when I'm wrong. But when I buy a car that she doesn't like, and I say, this might be a future classic, you have no idea. This could be worth, millions one day. And it's kind of my joke when I might buy a distasteful or bad car. So, you
questionable purchase.
Yeah. You don't really know what will be found to be rare or important to people 10 years from now. You can take a guess. I have my hunches, but my father-in-law's best friend bought a short wheel. He had a choice between a GTO and a short wheelbase, and it was for $3,000. Pick one. And it was just a race team that was trying to get rid of him and move on to the next car. And he bought the short wheelbase, which he, obviously regrets. But at the same time, I look at him and was like, you've bought a short wheelbase for $3,000 and you drive it He drives it all the time. And because in his mind, it's a $3,000 car that someone sees as, a multi-million dollar car, but you just never know.
Well, what I see coming up right now that I never really expected was American luxury cars from the 1970 through 1980 timeframe. Big Chrysler New Yorkers and Lincoln Continentals and Town Cars and Mercury Marquis. Those cars, I mean, they're on the rise.
You just made my brother's day. He's got a Lincoln with the opera windows, and it's in perfect condition.
Oh my goodness. Is it a Cartier edition?
I don't know. I don't think so. And he loves it. And he told me 2 years ago when he bought it, no one is paying attention to these cars, and I think they're excellent. And he may have a point. I think I love the 77 Eldorado.
Mm-hmm.
I think you're right. I think you're 100% right. I think I'm not going to go out and say that they're going to be considered to be a blue chip. I don't know. But they're going to rise in value. And I honestly believe it's that relative value theory where you see what is being spent on everything else, and at some point a $15,000 to $20,000, 1977 Cadillac looks like a steal. And it looks like a steal until you start looking around and saying, oh, how do we get from 15 to 50 to $100,000 for one of these? And it's because they're awesome. And you get in one, and it's so comfortable, and it's so I don't know. The cars have the ability to transport you to the era and make you feel like you did in that era. And in the era, that was an awesome car to own. You were, king of the world in one of those. And through time, people's trends and tastes change, and they tend to come back to it.
So true. Those cars are so unlike cars today. So pick a car, any car today. You get in it and you are essentially cocooned.
Right.
There's not a whole lot of lateral room to move around. Leg room is really a premium in just about any car today. And, I get cramps if I can't stretch my legs out. And I find that I can almost never stretch my legs out versus a Lincoln Town Car. I mean, it's a living room with wheels and plush. The materials are unlike anything in cars now. And they have that amazing flotation ride,
Yes.
So it's such a throwback. And when younger people discover that, they're blown away.
I think you're spot on. And I think for me, even I have so much time to explore cars. I don't have, I have a good amount of experience in these cars as a passenger in some cases through my early years. And through observation of what has been cool and trendy and changing that. But I still have so many cars that I don't have personal experience with, that when I get into it, even if it's, so like an FJ40 that I've driven for the first time, 2 years ago, I wasn't blown away by it, but it was, I liked it. I enjoyed it. It was a different experience. I think there will be a lot of people my age that are going to pull those values up on a lot of those cars that are accessible, drivable, affordable. I think it's fun. It's a different experience. It's a completely different style than, I had my brother and I had a Volkswagen Golf, a Mark IV, and we modified everything we could. We swapped it. It was the slowest thing in the world. It was a 2-liter, so the wrong engine. So there was no hope of it ever being fast, but it looked fast, and it was special to us. And that was the style in that era, and it's kind of carried through. But now I see a lot of people going backwards a little bit, and in my age group, which is important. And it's not a 70, but we're selling a 1959 Buick Invicta, and it has that boat-esque travel when you're on the road. And it takes a little bit to stop that behemoth, but it's a different experience, and it's calming for me to drive around in a car like that, because you don't want to drive it fast.
That's a cool car.
It's a beautiful car.
I love the angry front end on that 59 Buick, snarling at you.
Yeah. It looks like angry eyebrows. It's just so, and I've spent a lot of time looking at that car, and it's beautiful. It's so beautiful.
I know you've seen Fast Times at Ridgemont High, right?
I don't know if I have.
You've never seen, you have got to see Fast Times at Ridgemont High. So
I've got to write that down.
Okay, so
I've heard it.
One of the main characters drives a 59 Buick, and he's delivering food in it. You know, this movie came out in the early 80s.
Okay.
So nothing was less cool in the early 80s than a 1959 Buick.
Yeah.
And in the movie, he calls it the cruising vessel.
I like that. Well, well, I've got to watch that movie. I've got to watch a movie tonight because that car will be going on Bring a Trailer, and we should put a clip of that on the auction.
Totally.
It is funny how, they're wonderful cars, but even, if the movie was made in the 80s, it was probably regarded as a jalopy, and now it's celebrated. And it just shows that passage of time and the cycle that come back to appreciating something. So
absolutely. 100%. Well, listen, I am excited to make my way up there and see the shop. I would really love a tour sometime.
Oh, you're always welcome. That's like half my job is touring people around and getting excited about what we do. So we'd love to have you up here and come up in the summer. Don't come January through March or you'll never come back. Sounds good to me. All right. Well, people can find you on the web at griotsmotors.com, right? And it's GRIOT'S motors.com. Correct. Nailed it. And your Instagram is Griot's Motors as well. Yep. Just Griot's Motors. Terrific. Phillip Griot, thanks for coming on the show. I really had fun, and we meandered a little bit, but that's what happens when you're nerding out, right? Yeah. No, we could keep going if we wanted to, but thanks for having me on. It's been a pleasant experience, and anytime you want to talk about cars, give me a call. That's all for this episode of Horsepower Heritage. If you like what you've heard, go to buymeacoffee.com/HP Heritage and become a patron of the show. I'll see you back here on Wednesday, April 24th for more of the people and stories behind the machines. So until then, I'm Maurice Merrick. Thanks for listening.